So I'd like you to go to the plugin section, please, and add a plugin. We're going to type API connector. And we want to look for the bubble one. So I'm going to scroll down the left-hand side and uncheck third-party developers, and then find this one, API connector by Bubble. Go ahead and install that. Let's add another API. We're going to call this Stripe. Now we will be jumping into the documentation shortly and referencing, where I'm getting this information from and how to sort of be able to read the documentation and interpret the documentation. For now, follow along, and I'll refer to the documentation when I think we need to look at it. So the authentication for Stripe calls is a private key in the header, third option down. And now we need our secret key. So let's go back to Stripe, head back to home. And remember, in this section over here, we have our secret key. Okay. If your dashboard looks a little bit different because you've been experimenting with some features, we can always go to the developer section, API keys, and also find the secret key here. Okay. Now I'm going to reveal my secret key. Don't worry, the secret key will be disabled by the time you watch this course. Okay. I'm going to copy the secret key. Back to the API connector, and in the development section, I want you to first type the word bearer, like so, and then hit spacebar, and then paste in your secret key. Let's look at that again. So bearer, space, and then secret key starts with sk_test. Fantastic. Something else we need to do now, we need a shared header for all of our calls. We need to type the word content type. Now I need to be very careful with this value. It needs to be spelled exactly like I'm typing it. And if you feel like you're not confident, jump into my editor, copy and paste the value into your own app. I'm going to type the word application in all lowercase. Then / x hyphen www hyphen form hyphen and then the word URL encoded. Okay, so we need to determine the content type so we can correctly interact with Stripe through these API calls. All right, onto the actual call itself. We're going to look at the Stripe documentation first. So I'm going to open up a new tab. I'm going to go to docs.stripe.com/API. And what we've just done is the authentication part. Okay, our API keys, it talks about form encoded request bodies up here as well. A feature we're going to use in this course is called checkout. I'm scrolling down the left-hand side to find checkout. And there are so many ways that we can actually integrate with Stripe. We can build our own custom integration using Bubble inputs and buttons. We can drag and drop embedded elements onto our page. One of the ways I like to do it, and I think probably the best way in terms of conversion, so users actually moving forward with putting their credit card details into your app, is actually using what's called a checkout session. And this is a Stripe hosted page. So when a user is on your Bubble app, they click on Get Started. It actually takes them to a Stripe page in the same browser, in the same tab. And it is a pre-configured, pre-built Stripe page with an enormous amount of functionality, fraud detection, and logic that it would probably be impossible for you to build yourself in Bubble. All of this real-time logic that I absolutely love, such as feeding back if a card detail is incorrect, and also blocking payment from what they determine to be fraudulent payments. I've been using Stripe Checkout for many years. From the day I started using it, my conversions went up. So don't try to rebuild this yourself. Use Stripe Checkout. I think it's an incredible feature. But we are going to interact with Stripe Checkout through the API connector. That's what we're doing right now. So we are currently on Checkout. And what we actually need to do is to create a checkout session before sending someone to Stripe Checkout, to the Stripe hosted page. So I'm going to scroll to the left-hand menu and select Create a Session. And feel free to have a read through some of this documentation. It's always a good idea. But I'm going to walk you through this step by step. So make sure that you have curl selected on the left-hand side. And we could copy this and then paste it into Bubble. Bubble will do some configuration. But I actually prefer doing it manually for a very particular reason. So I'm going to actually copy this URL. Okay. Command-C in my Mac. Going to head back to Bubble. All right, guys. So here we are. I'm going to click on Expand. I'm going to call this Checkout Session. We're going to use this as an action. An action is basically a workflow. And this is going to be a post call. It's going to be a post call because we're sending data to Stripe and then receiving data back. If it was a get call, that means we're just pulling data down, but we actually need to send data. I'm going to paste in the URL that I copied earlier from Stripe. And now we're going to add some parameters. And there are two ways that we could have done this. We could have also used the body down here. I find it to be a bit more difficult to read when I'm using the body for these Stripe calls. When I'm dealing with other APIs like OpenAI, I tend to use this body down here, but for this course, we're going to use parameters instead. Let's go back to the documentation. Okay, so parameters, that's what we're dealing with. So one of the parameters we're going to be sending to Stripe is a customer email. Okay, we're going to be pre-filling the Stripe hosted page with a customer email. This needs to be done. One of the problems I've had in the past is if I don't pre-fill my customer's email in the form, the email in the form that they type in might be different to the email in your Bubble app. We're using this as a matching process in the back end. So we need to send the email to Stripe. So we're going to be using that. We're going to be using mode. Okay, this says required. Is this a one-off payment or is it a subscription? We're going to be choosing subscription. We're going to be adding return and success URLs. And one of the things I love about Stripe Checkout, the Stripe hosted page, is all the logic happens on the page. So if a payment fails, it just remains on the page and says, put in, try a different card, etc. It will guide the user along through to a successful payment. And if it is unsuccessful, well, then they just click back and they go back to the pricing page. Nothing's happened. So we don't have to think about that logic. When we return someone, if it's successful, show them this particular message. We will know when it's successful because Stripe will automatically return them. If it's unsuccessful, Stripe will just keep them at that Stripe hosted page. So we need some URLs. And one of the things that I love about using the API is that we can send metadata as well. That will help us when it comes to provisioning access to the app we're building from backend workflows. So we're going to be sending some metadata too. Okay, let's go back to Bubble. So the first one will be called mode. The value is subscription. This can remain private, but we do need to check the box for query string. Okay, query string needs to be checked for all of these parameters. Otherwise, they won't be sent to Stripe correctly. The next one will be customer email. Has to be typed lowercase in this exact format. This is from the documentation we've just read. I'm going to leave that blank for a second. I'm going to uncheck private because this needs to be dynamically assigned. And I'm going to check on query string. Now, one of the required parameters is basically number of line items, because we can send multiple line items to Stripe, but we only really have one. So I'm going to type the word line_items. I'm going to type open square brackets, 0, close square brackets. And then I'm going to open square brackets one more time and type quantity. And then close square brackets. The value of this is just 1, okay? We have to do this, otherwise it won't work. And then check query string. Now we need to send the price ID. Now this is key. This is how we charge a user the correct amount for the correct plan. This will be line items, line_items, open square brackets 0, close square brackets, and then open square brackets and type the word price. And then close square brackets. Now, just to initialize this call, we're going to go find the starter plan ID from data, option sets, plan, and then modify attributes on the starter option. Going to copy this across all of it. It's up to the second line here. Make sure you grab the last character. Command C on my Mac. And then back to the API connector and then paste in the value. This does need to be dynamic, so I'm going to remove private and then check query string. Now I want to send the plan name across. This will be very useful when it comes to communicating through the backend. So to do that, the format needs to read metadata, and then in square brackets, plan. Now I'm going to type the value starter. Okay, and this is just something I've created myself. I'm going to uncheck private and then check query string. This value will change to growth or yearly depending on which pricing card a user selects from Bubble. And now we need 2 URLs. First one being success URL. And the next one being cancel URL. Okay, and to find those URLs, it basically needs to be the pricing page. So I'm simply just going to copy the URL. So here's my URL. And I'm going to copy and paste both of them. Now I want you to uncheck private and check query string for both. You might think to yourself, well, why are these not private? Do we want to edit them? And yes, I am going to create the ability for us to change to a different cancel page or a different success page. I want to demonstrate how to do that because maybe you don't want to bring them back to the pricing page, okay? Okay, folks, and last thing to do is please type in your email, or this could be any email, but it needs to be a real email, okay? For this course, you have to use real emails. I'm going to show you a technique I use to take my email and then use it multiple times using the plus icon. But I'm going to now type in my real email address. Okay, now I specifically didn't tell you this at the start of this section because I wanted you to go through creating this yourself, but you can actually jump into my app and copy and paste this into your own app. Okay, so you can come up here, right click copy, go back to your app and then paste it in. I specifically didn't want you to do that. The other reason why I didn't want you to do that is because it will probably contain all of the calls for this Stripe connector setup. And that's going to take us a while to get through, and I want you to be able to learn how to do this yourself. But if you do get frustrated, you can go ahead and do that, okay? Just copy and paste from my app. So I'm just going to look at the parameters one last time, make sure there are no spelling errors. Okay, so mode, subscription, customer email is my real email address, line items, quantity 1, line items, so I can see an S is missing from the price, so line items, because it's a list, 0, price with the price we got from Stripe. Metadata plan is starter, success URL, I just copied and pasted from my app. That takes me to the pricing page. They are all not private except for mode and the quantity, because those will never change. And lastly, we have query string checked for each one. Okay, now it's time to initialize the call. All right, and if you see the pop-up, then this call has successfully initialized and will be available to us now in the workflow section in Bubble. Something I like to do before I save this is just to scroll down and look at some of the data that's returned. There's a lot of stuff here. And if I scroll right down, I can show raw data. Sometimes it's easier to read this. So this is what Stripe has returned to us, because we did a post call. We sent data, and now we're receiving data back. And we're receiving back that Stripe has recognized. We've got a cancel URL. We've got the amount total and various other fields that we'll be utilizing in our calls. Let's go ahead and save that. And again, if it didn't work, you can come copy and paste or inspect my API connector. But it needs to be your own email address. It's not going to work with my email address and my pricing plan. The reason why it won't work specifically with this price is because this price is unique to my Stripe account. And my Stripe account is unique because of this secret key. Okay, so it needs to be your own data in here. However, we've now initialized a call. That means in the workflow section, I can now access, if I go to plugins, a Stripe checkout session. And where we left private unchecked has given us the ability to insert dynamic data. Okay, I'm going to delete that. Okay, well, I hope you got through that, and I've mentioned multiple times you have access to my editor, so if it doesn't work for you, it's going to be a typo. Okay, there's going to be a space or missing an S, which I did the first time. It is a little bit fiddly, but it needs to be correct. So just make sure, comb through your fields and make sure that that is all correct. Make sure you're using your secret key, your email address, your pricing IDs, not mine. It won't work. All right, folks, let's now move on to actually creating the workflows for how a user can subscribe to a plan using the buttons, basically. So back on the pricing page, I'm going to click on Get Started, and let's add a workflow. And the first thing we're going to do is go down to Plugins to find our Stripe checkout session that we created in the API connector. Just click on that. So let's just talk about what's actually happening behind the scenes. So over here we have a customer. We're going to be signing up as someone real soon. When we choose the starter plan, we are communicating with Stripe via the checkout session object. A user will then enter their card details and some personal information. And if the payment is successful, we're redirected back to the pricing page, and we are going to show a pop-up saying that that payment was successful. So that's what the user sees. The user sees Stripe checkout and then pricing page with a success pop-up. But what's happening behind the scenes is that Stripe will then, after a successful payment, communicate with the Bubble server, so the back-end workflows. And how this works is that Stripe is going to create what's called an event and send that event through a webhook. And a webhook is a way for Stripe and the Stripe servers to communicate with our Bubble server, okay, through a webhook. And Stripe is going to send some crucial data that we need to know that a payment was successful, because the payment happened at Stripe. The payment did not happen at Bubble. And I suspect a large cohort of you guys have been using the Stripe plugin or have built Stripe integrations before and would usually run your workflows or sometimes run your workflows client-side, in the workflow tab. The problem with that is sometimes after successful payment, a user might close their tab prematurely before all the workflows have run, or they might be on their phone driving through a tunnel. I walked down to the coffee shop earlier, I was writing an email and I lost signal. So there are many reasons why we shouldn't be using client-side workflows to provision and save data back to Bubble. What I mean by that is in the user's browser, we're using the Bubble server to basically pretty much guarantee that when a payment is made, we can then save all that payment data back to Bubble. The user can close the session if they like, they can have lunch, they can shut down their computer, go surfing, doesn't matter, because we're communicating between Stripe and Bubble in the backend and not relying on the user to wait and be patient while they're returned back to Bubble, page to refresh, and those workflows to run. We're skipping all of that, going straight to the backend. So that's this part down here, the Bubble server. Now the event, and there are many, many events, and we're going to get comfortable with these events shortly. One of the events is called checkout session completed. When that event is created, it's going to send that event with that event data back to the Bubble server. One of the fields will be the user's email address. We'll then create a subscription, add the user to that subscription. We'll be creating a payment later on, also associating the payment with the subscription, and then updating the user with this newly created subscription. Okay, let's fill in these dynamically. So the customer is the current user's email. That's going to be pre-filled in the Stripe hosted checkout page. The price is the parent group's plans ID price test. Okay, just dealing with test. So how do we deal with live IDs? Because we have two IDs, test and live. And if we had to deploy this app to live with test IDs, it wouldn't actually work. So how do we determine this? I'm going to use isn't live version. Isn't live version is yes. And then format it as text. So this gives us two expression inputs. Isn't live version is yes means that it's the test version. Isn't live version is no means it's the live version. So within here, we can now insert dynamic data and say that this is the test and this is a parent group's plans live. And Bubble knows if it's using a live version of the software or is using a test version of the software, so it will select the relevant key depending on which environment we're in. Let's close that. What's the plan name? So the plan name is the parent group's plans display, starter, growth, or yearly. Now, the success URL. And for this, I'm going to select this URL. Okay, so it's going to extract the URL that the user is on. Then I'm going to add my own parameter here. Question mark, success equals true. And we're going to use this to show a pop-up to a user when they arrive back from Stripe to say, hey, that was successful. If a payment is unsuccessful, then a user will need to hit the back button on the Stripe hosted page, which means it'll just return them back to the URL without this parameter. and that would be the cancel URL. Cancel URL has no parameter, so we won't show them the pop-up. So guys, this creates the checkout session. But now we need to send someone to the Stripe hosted page. So for that, we're going to navigate, open an external website, and because it's a post call, it returns a bunch of data. We saw that when we initialized the call. And what we're interested in is the result of step 1's URL. Okay, how did I know this existed? Let me just take you back to the plugin section. And if I say manually enter API response, if I scroll down, I can see that we have a URL here. Look at this, checkout.stripe.com with all of these characters to create a unique checkout session. Okay. And guys, that is all we're going to do for client-side workflows. We create the session, we send them to Stripe. After that, like I said earlier, we're communicating through webhooks, okay? I'm going to bring this illustration back up now. So what we've done is we've selected the starter plan, created the checkout session, and we are sending them to Stripe checkout. What happens next is between your customer and Stripe, inputting their card details and trying to pay for the starter plan. Now we're going to move on to this communication, the bubble server part. And for that, we need to create a webhook in Stripe, then enable backend workflows to be able to communicate with the webhook. Okay, now we're stepping it up here slightly. Don't worry, we'll take it slow. After we create this webhook, we'll know how it's done, and we'll be recreating this process to be able to interact with future invoices, when a user cancels or when their card fails, and various other pieces of logic as well. So we're going to go back to Stripe, and I'm going to click into webhooks. So folks, depending on when you do this course, it's now, it's almost July 2024, and I've got a notification saying that the webhooks tab will be renamed to event destinations. I'm just going to click on learn more. And it sounds like the webhook endpoints will remain the same. So I think we're okay. I'm just going to go back. The next thing I'd like you to do is in the search section, I'd like you to type the word workbench, because this might be enabled by default by the time you watch this course. If it's not, I'd like you to opt into workbench. Okay, so introducing workbench, made for builders to quickly iterate, debug, and grow the integration. Workbench is a new developer tool for Stripe dashboard and beyond. Let's start using workbench. Okay. So now within workbench, we're going to click on webhooks. And the first thing we're going to do is to create an endpoint. And just while I've said that, I've noticed that this little graphic is a short little summary based on the graphic that I showed you earlier in the presentation. We've got a user that initiates an action, data is sent through a post call to Stripe, and then Stripe returns information to the server. Okay, let's create an endpoint. So there are many, many events that Stripe can send to your endpoint, your bubble server basically. They can be account related, balance related, they can be charges, but the one we're going to use is checkout. Okay, checkout is exclusive for this Stripe hosted payment process. And the one I want here is checkout session completed. How do I know I want this one? Well, basically through the documentation. It's all in docs.stripe.com/API. Go down to checkout sessions, and there's a webhook section that explains how to use these. And the recommendation from Stripe was, if you're using Stripe checkout like we're doing to provision access to products and services in your Bubble app, use this event, because that's going to send back the user if the payment was successful, how much they paid, everything we need to be able to provision access to the starter plan basically. So I'm going to click on checkout session completed. And this description says this occurs when a checkout session has been successfully completed. So this will not be sent if a user fails a payment. For that, we're going to use another event. Let's go ahead and continue. Okay, I'm just going to type a little description here. For successful subscription payments. Now in terms of this endpoint URL, so Stripe is asking for a destination. Greg, I have all of this event data. Someone's trying to sign up to the starter plan. In fact, they made a successful payment. I want to let you know about this payment and this user data. So we have to go to the backend in Bubble and create this endpoint so that Stripe can communicate with us. So let's head back into Bubble. We need to go to the settings area now, guys. Okay, now under my app plan, I've upgraded to agency. Maybe you're from an agency as well, but you need to be on a paid plan for backend workflows to run. You can build in the backend, but you cannot receive data through webhooks unless you're on a paid plan or a free trial. So hopefully you accepted that free trial. Now we're going to go to the API section and we're going to enable the top one here. Enable workflow API and backend workflows. Fantastic. Bubble's now given us our root URL. Okay, we don't actually need this because Bubble's going to create a new URL for us shortly. Now in this drop down, we can head down to backend workflows. And here we go. These are now server-side workflows. We're going to create a new workflow. We're going to call this checkout session. Now this needs to read like a URL because it will be a part of our endpoint URL. So all lowercase, joined with a hyphen. Checkout session. Okay. We do need to expose this as a public API workflow. Why do we need to do this? Well, because Stripe needs this endpoint. That's why we're creating it, so Stripe can communicate with us. But Stripe has no way to authenticate with Bubble. And that's why we need to basically check some of these boxes to basically open up access to the backend of our server. We will be using a security method later on to secure all of our endpoints so that people can't basically send unsolicited data to our server. We'll get there. For now, we're just going to keep it open while we build and test. So we're going to expose it as a public API workflow. We're going to say that this workflow can be run without authentication. Yes, because how is Stripe? Stripe isn't a user of our app. So how do they authenticate? They can't. We're going to ignore privacy rules when running this workflow as well, okay? Because this is just open to the public for now. We'll secure it shortly. This is going to be a post call, okay? By default, that should be selected. But now we're going to use detect request data. Basically, this enables Bubble to pass a lot of this API metadata that's going to come back to us in a JSON format and then present it in a way that it's useful for us to be able to capture the data we need, okay? So we need detect request data. Very important, guys. And this is in terms of security. I want you to check the box that says include headers in detect data, because there's a crucial piece of data that we're going to extract from the header to make sure that only Stripe can communicate with our endpoints. Okay, one more thing I'd like you to do is just on the naming, just add square brackets here. It'll become apparent soon why we're doing this. It's just easier to read because there's going to be more information in this block. Let's also give this a color. Let's give all of these endpoints a different color. So let's choose cyan for this. No particular reason, but I want to reserve green for go, orange for warning, and red for deletion for other endpoints. Okay, guys, once you've done that, the next thing I'd like you to do is click on detect data. Then I'd like you to take your mouse cursor and hover all across to the E on initialize and then click. Bubble has now copied this URL. Leave this where it is. Don't click on cancel. Navigate back to Stripe now. I want you to paste this URL in. Okay. Double check that the word initialize is fully formed, that during the copying process, it didn't skip out some characters, which sometimes it does. Once you've done that, we're going to create a destination. Fantastic. So Stripe now knows where to send event-based data that happens in Stripe. And because a user is paying in Stripe on a Stripe hosted page, we need to know about that. Okay, so Stripe is now ready to send this data. So guys, now that this webhook has been set up, it's now waiting for this event data to be created. There is no event data, nothing has happened. Let's go back to Bubble. I'm just going to cancel this for a second, because what I'd like to do is actually sign up as a user and actually run through this process, because these workflows are actually up and running. Okay, so we're going to sign a user up, and just before we choose to sign up to a plan, then we will initialize detect request data, and then we'll continue from there. So let's go and select the auth page, and let's preview this page. And I'm going to sign up as someone, and why don't we just use the same names for people, but you need to use your email address, okay? Your own email address here needs to be real. So let's just make up some names. Okay, so the first one will be Daniel Smith. Onto the email address. So now to create test email addresses, if you're a Gmail user, this will work. You probably know about this already. You can, for instance, if your email address was greg@bubble.io, I can use greg plus Daniel@bubble.io, greg plus Emily@bubble.io, and all of those email addresses will be routed through to my greg@bubble.io email. So this is how you create multiple test users that all go back to the same account, but Bubble needs unique email addresses to create users in Bubble. So that's the strategy that I tend to use. So for you, it will be the first part of your email and then plus Daniel, and then the rest of your email. Okay, once you've done that, let's go ahead and sign up. All right, once you've done that, let's change to the pricing page. And let's go ahead and test this out. Okay, so that is validation that our checkout session that we created in the API connector is working. Now, stop what you're doing. We need to go back to Bubble, because the process of completing this checkout session will initialize that webhook to be sent to Bubble. We want to be ready to catch the webhook. So back in Bubble, backend workflows, checkout session, and detect data. Okay. So you can see that the email address was populated, okay? So your email plus Daniel was populated. That cannot be changed. If that was changed, we wouldn't be able to identify this user in the backend workflows. Now Stripe enables us to test with test cards. They have cards that are successful cards and cards that will be declined when we try to use them for testing purposes. We're going to use the success card. This is the card number 4242, 4242, 4242. It's a 16-digit card number, 4242. Okay, that is a Visa card. For the expiry month and year, it just needs to be sometime in the future. So I'm going to say 0125. CVC just needs to be any 3 digits, 123. Now, name on the card needs to match Daniel's name that we've recorded in Bubble, all right? So that's going to be Daniel Smith. Postcode, I'm currently in the United Kingdom. I'm just going to put in just a random postcode. That's not my postcode, it's just random from London somewhere. Actually, I think it might be Brighton. Okay, something else to mention about this checkout page is that in Stripe itself, we set up the branding so it matches our primary colors. We can have our logo in here in the top left-hand corner where it says test mode. We can put our logo. If you want to include a unique image for the starter plan, you can do that as well. You can write longer descriptions. You can add coupons. It's kind of endless. We will have a look soon at what we can configure in Stripe. Now, the power of Stripe is also the ability to be able to handle country-specific or region-specific customers. Okay, so we can show them pricing in their particular price. Like I'm in the UK. This would be around £16, I think, which is quite nice that it's displayed to me in my own currency, because some currency have big denominators. Like if you're in India, this would be displayed with a lot more zeros, other parts of the world as well. So that's a real neat feature that we can configure. One of the most important things is being able to enable certain payment services. Okay, like Link. And all different countries have different basic apps. One of the apps I use is called Shop. That could be enabled here as well. There are many options, and we'll get there soon. The beautiful thing about checkout is that they will show country and region specific options to your country and region specific customers. And probably impossible, I'd say, to build in Bubble, or would take you a long time. Why do that when we can just get up and running within an hour? Okay guys, let's go ahead and subscribe. I'm going to save that card for future use because we'll be doing this many times. Okay, and can you see that when it returned to Bubble, we have question mark success equals true. I'm going to go back, and this refresh bar happened because basically our webhook has been initialized. Let's go to the backend. And here we go. API workflow request data. All right, lots of interesting stuff here. So this is the event data that we configured in Workbench. Okay, this is all the stuff that Stripe has created around what's just happened, this payment, and it's sent it to us to say, hey Greg, this is everything that happened in Stripe. Use it as you please. I'm going to scroll down, right down, and you can send all of this stuff. You can see all of this stuff being sent. Okay, so let's have a look at some data here. So we know it was a checkout session. We've got an amount total. Now it says 2,000. So Stripe displays amounts in cents. We always have to divide by 100 to get the real amount. What else do we have? Created date, fantastic. A customer ID. Okay, now we set that up in our database. ID customer. This is the unique Stripe customer ID. We need to save that back to Bubble. We've got the postcode. We've got the email address in there a few times. There's a lot of great stuff here. Okay, and one of the things that we'll be using to secure this endpoint is an IP address. And that IP address is available in CF connecting IP 52.15.183.38. And basically, Stripe has a list of IP addresses that they will use exclusively to be able to communicate with our server with. So basically, we just need to grab that list, input it into an option set, and set up an expression that says, if an IP address from this range hits our endpoint, let's work with it. And if it's not true, let's ignore it. Okay. Maybe you're a qualified developer and you're saying to me, Greg, what about IP spoofing? I've done my research. Stripe has preventative measures to mitigate issues of IP spoofing. So this is a very secure way to secure our endpoints. All right, guys. So let's just scroll all the way back up because there are a few things I'd like to do. One of the interesting things here is an invoice. Okay, and we've got an invoice number. And basically when we use checkout to subscribe a person up initially to a subscription, a payment is, of course, being made and an invoice is being generated, and we want a user to be able to download an invoice. So we will be creating an account page with the repeating group to be able to go grab all of the invoices that have been generated from a user making a payment. Okay, so it's important that we are saving invoice numbers as well in some of these calls. Payment status is paid. Fantastic. Okay, this is all we need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Okay. So if I actually go back to the illustration, the checkout session completed, endpoint has just been sent down. Okay, we've initialized that. And now we need to create a subscription, create a payment, and update a user. So I'm going to choose data and things, create new thing, create a subscription, add all fields. And because this event was sent, it means that this is definitely active now, okay? This is an active subscription. That event would have not been sent to us. If it failed, a user just would have had to have clicked back and carry on with their day. Let's grab the ID customer. Now to interact with request data, we start with workflow data sources, request data. And the ID customer is just basically represented as just the customer. Now, if I get stuck here with where this data is coming from, I can click back on this block, go to modify types, and actually dig through the fields and values. So if I scroll down, I can get to a customer. And here I have the value that was returned, okay? Subscription ID. This is request datas. And I can type sub and I get the object subscription. We'll come back to plan. Let's first look at a user. Now remember, we're sending an email address to Stripe. Stripe is sending that email address back to us. So we can simply do a search for user and match the email addresses. So email equals request data. I'm going to type customer and then customer email. Here we go, customer email. And now for the plan, sorry, the first item, because I was selecting a list there, okay? Now for the plan, so somehow we need to now retrieve the starter plan. And remember, in the plugin section, I'm sending metadata starter. So that is going to be returned to us. Okay. So it's one of these plans. So we're going to have to create a filtering process here. So I'm going to say, get an option, get all the plans first of all. Here are the plans. Okay. Let's grab all of them. Okay. Close that. Now I'm going to filter, and this is where we need to match the word starter from the metadata with starter from our option set. So we'll say request data. I'm going to type in meta. Here it is here, meta plan. That will be returned as text, and I'll say the word starter or growth or yearly. So let's do the matching process. When it is this plan's display, so when starter is starter, then we've got a match. We select the first item, and in this instance, it would have been the starter plan. Okay. Now I want to also create a payment, but before we set up that data type, let's also make changes to a user. Okay. Now we can't do current user because we're in the backend. So we're going to copy this expression, search for user's first item, and then paste it here. Okay, paste it here. Just make sure that this is in blue. So I want to grab the ID and I want to grab the subscription. So the description equals the result of step 1. We just created it. And the customer we get from the request ID customer. Boom. Okay guys, so that is the full cycle. User starts by clicking the button, they go to Stripe post checkout. If it's successful, an event is sent back to our Bubble server and we capture the data, and that's going to happen very quickly. Actually, it's going to happen quicker than if we ran it in the front end. Now, we need to go back to Stripe now that we've initialized this endpoint and just remove the word initialize, okay? Otherwise, it's not going to work when we sign up more people to plans. So let's go do that now. So I'm back in Stripe and I'm going to click on this edit button, and then I'm just going to go to the end here, just press backspace and initialize. So it just ends on the letter N, okay? Just ends on the letter N, and now I'm going to save. Brilliant. Now, something else to mention, okay? We're in test mode. We're in test mode. You're using test data. This endpoint, version test. So both Stripe and Bubble are using test data. This endpoint will need to be edited again when you deploy your app to live. You just need to remove version test because it's not test data anymore. You can do that, or you can create another endpoint and leave version test where it is if you want to continue testing in your Stripe dashboard. But version test is for the test in Stripe. Live is for live in Stripe. All right, folks, so let's now have a dig around. If we close Workbench, I want you to click on Customers. And in Customers, we can see we have our first customer, Daniel Smith. Okay, Daniel Smith. Let's find out more about Daniel Smith. So Daniel Smith ended up here. Let's click. And now we can see that we have a subscription. The product is starter. It is active. The billing frequency is monthly. And if we click into this, we can see even more information about Daniel, card details, the particular price on the starter plan, because remember, a starter plan can have a monthly price, yearly price, multiple prices, depending on how you want to structure it. We can see that we have an up and coming invoice. Today is the 27th of June. On the 27th of July, this invoice will be sent. Okay, but because it's a recurring subscription, the invoice will be, the card details that Daniel has entered will be charged automatically. Okay, the invoice is created just for accounting reasons. I'm going to click back on Daniel Smith because I want to point you to this section here, payments. So subscriptions and payments are two separate objects, okay? Or in Bubble, we call them data types. So we need to create a separate data type for payments because subscription is a recurring thing. So we've set up our subscription and we have the various fields, but we do need to capture every time a payment is made. Maybe Daniel is signed up for the next 3 years. We need to capture all of those payments. And then we need to enable Daniel to download an invoice for every payment that is made, even if it's automated, which it will be recurring. Now, the first time a subscription is set up, a payment is made and an invoice is generated. So there is already an invoice sitting here that we can utilize when we start building out the account section. But for now, we do need to capture the payment information as well. So let's head back to Bubble. Let's go to Data, Data Types. Let's create a new one called Payment. Go ahead and create that. Okay, let's create some fields. So much like a subscription needs a user to be able to identify it in the backend workflows, we also need a user here. Okay? User is a user, simple. I also want to associate a payment with the subscription. So all these payments are made. What are they made for? So we need to be able to tie it to a subscription. This payment was made for this up and running subscription that's been running for the last 6 months, but we have lots of payments associated with that subscription. So that is a subscription. Now we need plan. Which plan was this payment made for? What about amount? how much did the customer pay? Yes, we can pull it from a plan, but I rather tend to pull it from Stripe itself, because we do need to talk about pro-ratering later. What happens if a user upgrades midway through the month from starter to growth, which we will be doing. Okay, so that will be an amount that's not from our option set, that will be dynamically created by Stripe. So payments can be variable amounts. Now for some IDs. Let's grab the ID of the customer. It's good to grab the ID. We also have a user, but I like to grab the ID as well. That's text. I want an invoice, because from this payment, I want to be able to retrieve an invoice. And I also want a charge ID. So that is a separate object created in Stripe, and it's useful for many reasons. One of those is issuing refunds, but it has a lot of other data attached to it as well. That is text. Lastly, we're going to say billing reason. Now, the billing reason could be the subscription has just been created, this is the first payment, or it could be this is part of a subscription cycle, an automatically charged payment. And that is actually returned to us and in the documentation, and we're going to have a read through the documentation shortly. That is text. Okay, with that, let's set up our privacy rules. Click on a new rule. Users payment. This payments user is current user. Uncheck all of these, otherwise everyone else will be able to grab that data. We don't want them to. Okay, with that done, and we're in the backend workflows section, let's quickly, between step 1 and step 2, I'd like to now create a new thing, create a new payment. Okay, add all fields, and let's connect the data here. So the amount comes from request data, and I'm going to filter by typing amount and amount total. Billing reason, I'm just going to type subscription create, subscription underscore create, all right? And this is case sensitive. I'm going to leave out the charge ID because we can't actually get the charge ID from this particular event data that's been returned, but I'm going to show you a way to get it. For now, we're going to say request data is customer. Invoice. Request data is invoice. So these are now IDs, okay? These are IDs that are being returned. I'm going to show you one more time. I go to modifier types, scroll down to where it says invoices. Here we go. An invoice starts with an IN. It ends in WAY is the ID of the invoice. If I had to go back to Stripe, and then if I had to click here under payments, if I scroll down a bit further, I can see connections, invoice, WAY. And then if I click on that, it's going to take me to invoices, and here I can see the invoice for Daniel Smith, all right, with all of this information. So that's what we're trying to do now. We're trying to connect the dots, And you can see that Stripe has all of these objects or data types. This is the invoice data type, and this is basically like a row in the database. This is an invoice that was created during the checkout process. During the checkout process, a subscription was created. A payment was created, an invoice was created, and actually quite a few other things. Let's have a look. So if we go back to Daniel Smith and I scroll down, here is an event, and any of these events can be sent to Bubble. The one we sent to Bubble was checkout session completed, but all of these other things happened. Okay, all of these other things happened. If I click on checkout was completed, here you go. here is our event, checkout session completed. And on the right-hand side, here is all the structured data that was sent. So this is what we've been extracting. Remember, we were extracting the amount total. Customer ID, remember it was called request data's objects customer. That's an ID. What about the invoice? I just close this down. Request data's objects invoice. There it is there. So everything, guys, is available for you to look at in Workbench in Stripe. Remember the mode was subscription we set up in the API connector. ID subscription, here it is here. Here's the success URL. Okay. So let's continue with this. So we know how to get the plan, okay? The plan is here. So I'm just going to copy this expression on step 1, go back to step 2, paste that in. The subscription, result of step 1. And the user, we're going to copy from here, copy expression, and then paste. Okay, guys, so almost done. We're missing the ID charge. For that, we need to be able to communicate with the invoicing endpoint, okay, or the invoicing object in Stripe. So we're going to go back to the Stripe documentation, have a quick read, then go to the API connector, initialize an API call because we're going to be making a get call, get API call to go get the invoice and extract the charge ID. Okay, let's continue with that. We're going to head back into the API connector because I want to make a get call to Stripe to basically receive the invoice that was created during this checkout session. And then within the invoice is also a charge ID, which I'm interested in. Okay, let's jump in. Let's head over to plugins and let's expand Stripe in the API connector. We're going to add another call. We're going to call this retrieve invoice. Now this is going to be a get call and we won't be using it in a workflow step. Instead, we'll be referencing Stripe from an actual field. So we'll leave it as data. Let's have a look at the Stripe documentation. Okay, so down the left-hand side, I've scrolled down to billing. Now we're dealing with billing and I've clicked on retrieve invoice. And retrieve an invoice retrieves the invoice with a given ID. And that ID has been returned to us through checkout session complete. So it looks like on the right-hand side that we've got our URL and then we have an invoice parameter at the end, and we're going to make that dynamic. Okay, so let's copy this URL. Let's go back into Bubble. And then paste that in. So this is the ID of an existing invoice. What I'm going to do is enclose it in square brackets because we are using parameters. Okay. And then I'm going to change this to just ID. So that's the key. Now we need a value. Now we already have a value and we can find it in our backend workflows. So back to the workflow. And what we want to do is go to, here it is here, okay? So to get that actual value, we can click back onto this API endpoint. We can click on modify types, scroll down and look for body object invoice. And that's going to be an ID. Here it is here, body object invoice. I'm going to copy that. So this is an actual invoice that will be in our Stripe account. Just going to make sure I get the full, all of it. Okay, so now I can go back and we can initialize this call with an actual real invoice and just make sure that obviously my ID is different to your ID. Okay, guys, just make sure you grab the full ID uncheck private because we need to feed dynamic data into this value. Okay, once you've done that, we can initialize the call. Fantastic. And we've got all this good stuff, amount due, charge method, and here is the charge ID that I'm after, charge ID. Okay, so we can save that. Now that we've done that, let's go back to the workflow section, click on step 2 payments, and now we can retrieve the charge by making this get call. And the way we do that is we say get data from an external API. We've just initialized this, so it's called Stripe retrieve invoice. And now we feed through the ID. We know where the ID is, it's request data's objects invoice. Request data's and then object invoice. There it is there. Once you've done that, you can close it. And now to get the charge, we just scroll down where it says charge and we're good to go. Okay. So we've done those 3 steps: create a subscription, create a payment, and add the subscription to the user. Now, we haven't actually created any data in the database because we initialized the call. So Bubble actually hasn't saved anything, neither did we have our workflow set up. So what we're going to do is actually shortly sign up as another user and go through the same process now that everything is initialized and these workflows are ready, and we'll be able to capture data. Before we do that though, I do want to go back to the pricing page because I want to create a success pop-up. Remember, we have a URL with a parameter question mark success equals true. I want that to work. So when a person makes a payment, they come back to the pricing page, we show them the pop-up, and it's just 100% confirmed that that all worked. All right, let's do that. Okay, let's go back to the pricing page, head over to the design tab, and we're going to look for a pop-up. There it is there, drop it on the page. We're going to call this pop-up success. And let's just edit the style of a standard pop-up because we need a few more pop-ups in the coming lessons. I'm going to add a border style of solid. I'm going to select our light gray here. I'm going to remove the outset, not a fan of the outset, and then add a radius of 8, consistent with all of our inputs. On the layout tab, I'm going to give this 24 pixels of padding on all 4 sides. Okay. Let's make this a column. Uncheck fixed width, but we do need a max width here. Maybe let's use 420. This is a fairly arbitrary size, doesn't really matter. Remove them in width. It's not a value that we're using. Let's get an icon in here. Icon, click it inside. Let's search for check. There's a check there. In actual fact, what I'd like is a field. And now we can use the check. And we're going to use our green. On the layout tab, I want this to be 24 pixels in size. Now let's grab some text and just add the word success. Let's try heading 6 here, see what it looks like. Yep, I like that. And these need to be in a new container or new group with a row layout. Okay, there we go. Group title. On the layout tab, I'm going to remove the mid height. Going to add some gap spacing. Let's try 12, looking good. And I'm going to add some bottom padding of 24. Let's add a little separator now. So back in the Appearance tab of Group Title, I'm going to check to define each border independently. And I'm just going to add a bottom border of light gray. Fantastic. Let's add some more text. And let's type a success message. So let's say your subscription was successful. You can manage your plan from your account page. Comma. Yeah, liking that. Let's add some gap spacing on pop-up success. Let's try 20. And we just need a button to be able to close this pop-up, okay, so that they just acknowledge the message and close the pop-up. We can just say close. I don't want this to be a primary button though, so let's try an outline button. Yeah, that's fine. Maybe we can put this on the right-hand side. Remove fixed width, remove min width, fit width to content. And then on the pop-up itself, we can remove the min height. Okay, let's run a workflow to close the pop-up. Add workflow. Hide the pop-up. Success. Okay, now when do we show this pop-up? Let's create a pages loaded event. So pages loaded. Now to instruct when to show this pop-up, we're going to say when get data from page URL, get success, which is text. When that is true, this is case sensitive, has to match what's returned in the URL. Then we're going to show pop-up success. Okay. Remember in the API connector, in the checkout session, this is the success URL. It's in the workflow. So when we create this checkout session, we are sending this URL, question mark success equals true. Okay, so that's what's returned if it's a successful checkout session, payment succeeded. And now we're referencing get success from page URL is true. Okay, so just make sure that the case is lowercase is true. Okay, something else I'd like to do before we sign up a new user is change this event color to green. And I'd like to add a conditional here to say only run this when the current user is logged in. Because we need another one to basically instruct a user to sign up to the app before they try pay for a plan. So I'm going to go to elements and an element is clicked. Going to find the button get started. Going to change this one to orange. This one will read when current user is logged out. Okay, so we need to do something here. We need to do something. So why don't we copy and paste this pop-up and create a new pop-up called warning. So right click, copy, right click, paste. Go down and find pop-up success copy. Make sure that you've selected it. Change it to warning. Okay, now let's just redesign this. Well, not actually redesign it. Let's just change some parameters here. So we're going to use our alert here. I've typed warning. Let's change this text to warning. And let's change this message to please sign up or log in to purchase a plan. Full stop. Now we need a link element. Drop that in. Now I think we did, yeah, we designed a button link secondary. There it is there. Let's just have fun here. Let's say, take me there. This goes to the auth page. And let's change this to true. Okay, And on the layout tab, let's remove fixed width. I want this one to span edge to edge, and let's change let's change the height to fixed, 44 pixels. Remove the close. And yeah, that will do the trick. So when do we show this? Back to the workflow tab. When the current user is logged out, when that button is clicked, instead of taking them to Stripe, we're just going to show them the pop-up warning. Okay, let's go back to the design tab. There's one more thing we need to do here. Close the pop-ups. Let's talk about this button here. So you've obviously signed up for a subscription at some point in the last few months. There was probably a pricing page similar to this one. And after you took out that subscription, maybe you came back to the pricing page, and then the buttons might have changed. One of the buttons probably said, this is your current plan. Okay, so we need to do the same thing. We can't just leave the buttons the way they are. We need to disable the plans that we didn't choose. And then we also need to actually we should disable all of the buttons because it's from the account page that I want users to be able to manage their plan, not from the pricing page. The pricing page is just for taking out the very first subscription, okay? So on this button, let's do the following. So click on the Get Started button. We need two conditionals here. We need to say that when the current user's subscription active is yes, then this element isn't clickable. So that's going to apply to all of the buttons, okay? The checkout session from the backend workflows is going to change the subscription active to yes. Remember, in step 1. So that's happening in the backend really quickly. By the time they get back to the page, this will be changed and activated, and now we can do something with this button. And the thing we're doing is we are making all these buttons disabled. I also want to feed back to the user which plan they've just purchased. So to do that, we're going to create another condition, which will read, when current users subscriptions plan, okay, is parent group's plan. Now we need another operator here, and, because a person can have a plan, but the active is no. So we need the plan to have active as yes, and for the plans to match. Current users, subscriptions, active is yes. Okay, we need both of those. When that's the case, instead of get started, let's type current plan. Let's add an icon. Let's add this check mark. I'm going to change the background color to black, and both icon color and label color to white. Font color. Okay, so two of the buttons will be disabled. One of the buttons will then say current plan with a check mark. And we're using the active as yes on the backend workflow. When a checkout session has successfully taken place, we're changing the subscription active to yes. Okay. A lot of development work there. I would like to test what we've done so far. So we need to actually log out of Daniel's account and then sign up as someone else. So to log out, let's just create a test page with a logout button just to make sure that we successfully have logged out. Let's add a new page. Let's call that test. Grab yourself a button, drop it on the page, call that logout, and then add a workflow. And simply, we're just going to log the user out. Okay. Once you've done that, preview the page. And then click on log out. Perfect. Now we can go to the auth page. And let's sign someone up. Why don't we call this person Amy Williams? Any password you like. Go ahead and sign up. Okay, so let's go back to the editor. And let's go to the auth page, find your sign up button, because I'd like to add another action here. So once we sign a person up, let's then navigate, go to page and choose the pricing page. Okay, that's for the sign up. For the button login, after logging the user in, well, we'll take them to an account page and we haven't yet created that. So we'll get there. For now, we should have 2 users in the database. You can always refresh data if it doesn't show. Here is Amy Williams, and we haven't taken out a plan yet, so there's no ID customer and there's no subscription. So let's change to the pricing page. I'm going to just use the URL here. Pricing. Okay, let's also take out the starter plan for Amy Williams because I would like to test upgrading as well. So let's click on Get Started. Test card. Remember, it's the 4242 all the way across. The expiry date needs to be some time in the future, whatever it is for you, make sure it's in the future. CVC, any 3 digits will do. Make sure to change the card holder's name to Amy Williams. And any postcode will do. Okay guys, so now we're ready to sign up Amy Williams or subscribe Amy Williams to this plan. Well, she is subscribing herself, I guess. And what we're hoping for is that the webhook is sent to Bubble, a subscription is created, a payment is created, and the subscription is added to the user. Now remember, for this to work in Stripe, in Workbench, you needed to remove the initialize from the URL. Let's just make sure you've done that. So I'm going to go to the Stripe dashboard. I'm going to make sure that I'm in test mode. Should be the default if you've just signed up. I'm going to go to developers and find my webhooks. And I've only got one webhook checkout session, and I'm going to make sure that the end of this URL ends in a checkout-session. There's no initialize. Okay. And in actual fact, keep this window where it is and click on Overview. Sorry, let's minimize Workbench, and we're going to click on Customers. We're going to come back here and review Amy Williams' details shortly. We're ready to make this payment. So subscribe. Being returned, success equals true in the parameter, therefore we're seeing a success message. Your subscription was successful. You can manage your plan from your account page. Okay, here we can see current plan. These haven't been disabled, so we're going to go back and have a look at those shortly. But what I'd like to do for now is look at the database. That's the most important thing here. All right, guys, so it looks like we've been successful so far. Let's click on this first row. If you're not seeing data here, you can always refresh the page as well. Click on the pencil icon. Okay, let's go through each field individually. So the subscription is active, yes. We've now got a customer ID. So I can take this customer ID and I could always use it in Stripe to search for a user. So if I click on search, this search is incredible, by the way, folks. You can search for literally anything in here. So I'm searching this customer ID and looky here. There's Amy Williams. Starter. She paid 20 bucks. This is the payment method that was used. Look at all of this data here. Invoice was generated. That's the activity. Checkout session was completed. And we also have these other events, and we're going to come back to these other events to have a look at them. One of them was this event here. An invoice was paid because we're going to be using this event for recurring payments. If I click across to subscriptions in my shortcuts, you can always search for it. Here's Amy Williams's email address. All looking good on Stripe. Back to Bubble, let's carry on. So ID subscription, brilliant. Starter plan, yes. There's the user. And all of the fields that we needed have been successfully populated. What about payments? Okay, I can already see a mistake on the amount. We'll fix that. So we need to divide this by 100. Got the billing reason. We've got the charge, yeah. So remember, we went to the API connector, created a get call to get the invoice to actually get this charge ID. ID customer, invoice ID. So it's all of these IDs. And these IDs all link different Stripe objects together. That's why we are wanting to save these IDs, and we can do lots with these IDs as well. We found the subscription as well. Fantastic. Okay, so the small change we need to make is on the backend workflows, on the checkout session, on payments, the amount, we just need to click on the more option here, divided by 100. Okay, guys. Really happy with that. First attempt, pretty much everything was a success aside from dividing the amount by 100. We're going to move on to now creating an account page. This is the final page we're going to be creating. This is so a user can manage their plan, okay? So they can update their personal details, change their email address, which will also change their email address in Stripe. They can see what plan they're on. They can click a button to manage their plan. They can cancel their plan. They can see their invoices and download their invoices. This is going to be super fun to build. So let's get started.